Hello, my name is Remi Cohen and welcome to my first video blog post. It's January 2010, Happy New Year, and we are going to talk about cordon pruning. Pruning, which is a winter activity when the vines are dormant, is one of the most important tools in the viticulturist's toolbox in terms of creating vine balance. Vine balance is the appropriate balance between vegetative or shoot and cane production and leaf production that we would see in this area, and fruit production, which is normally over here during the harvest season. See, the thing is, if you have too much vegetation, you'll shade the fruiting area and also cause excessive vigor and sort of green and underripe characteristics. Conversely, if you have too little vegetation and a lot of fruit, you won't have enough photosynthetic capacity in order to ripen the fruit. So vine balance is about achieving the right level of yield and grape maturity, including not only bricks, but tannins and flavor development that you would like according to what your goal is for winemaking. If we do not prune, what happens is every single bud, which is at the base of every leaf, is a potential growing point for this coming season. So you could imagine that if we do not prune this vine, if shoots start growing from every single one of these positions, they'll be competing against each other and they'll all grow very weak. On top of that, there will be fruit all over the place. Localizing the fruit is another reason why we prune. Localizing the fruit is helpful in order to manage the sunlight exposure as well as wind exposure in the fruit area to create uniform ripening and also to facilitate things like disease control and harvest. So again, you can imagine quite the mess we would have, as well as all the weak shoots that we would have if we tried to leave this unpruned. So fortunately for viticulturists in this day and era, we have many, many years of experimentation and practice that we've come up with certain industry standards. So provided that you've selected the right site, but then also the right variety and rootstock for the site that you are working with, as well as the right spacing between the vines and between the vine rows, then there are some industry standards that will help you to prune to create the vine balance that's desired. So here we're pruning some Chardonnay in the Carneros region of Napa Valley, and I guess we're just going to go ahead and start. Some of the industry standards include, along a cordon, which we have here, let me take one step back, there's two main types of pruning systems. There's cordon, which is what we have here, and cane. In the cordon system, basically you have not only your trunk, but a horizontal and permanent extension of the trunk along your fruiting wire, and these are called cordons. On your cordons, you have spur positions, and that's the place where you're going to prune and leave buds that you're going to intend to have grow next year, or in this case, this coming season. In a cane pruning system, you have your trunk, but then you use an annual replacement of one-year-old wood. This one-year-old wood is the most fertile wood. And in both systems, we're using buds that come from fertile wood. In one, we have a horizontal permanent extension called a cordon, and in the other, which we'll cover in a different video, you'll have a horizontal cane extension, an annual replacement every year. With cordon pruning, some of the industry standards are that you should have a spur position about 5 or 6 inches apart, about a hand's width distance, maybe a bigger hand than mine. This is, for example, too close, which could cause some shading, but it's a life system here, and so you have to work with the effects of Mother Nature and how the vine's just going to choose to grow, and you can manipulate and modify that as the season progresses, and we'll talk about that. So about 2 spur positions per foot, every 5 or 6 inches apart, and then you make a 2-bud spur, so you leave 2 buds and you'll have 2 growing points. Here's just one, but most of them have 2 growing points that will grow this following season, each having maybe 1 to 2 clusters per shoot. This is a shoot. So those are some pretty common industry standards with cordon pruning, and I'm going to start pruning and talk about some exceptions. So one thing that's important is we don't want to get the spur positions to creep up too high. You want them to be close to the fruiting wire, again, to control harvest and disease control and things like that. So we're actually going to remove completely the top position and prune to the bottom. So here I'm removing the top position, and the pulling isn't the funnest part. I'm to save time, not going to complete that. You might want to wear gloves when you're pruning as well. And make sure to put your pruning shreds in the middle of the rows so you can flail mow them and incorporate them into the soil. And then the lower spur, I'm going to make a 2-bud spur, and I'll do some close-ups later. You want to cut the cut at a diagonal away from the closest bud or any buds so that the sap that will flow from the wound will not flow onto the bud and create a mold issue. Here's a case where they're pretty close, so even if the top one, which in this case is, if the top one was farther away, I might select that one here. In fact, I might not select this bottom one and select this one instead to make some more room here. So for example, I'm going to cut this top one off. And then 2-bud spur this position. Sometimes the basal spur works. This actually looks like it wasn't an intended shoot, but is in a decent position. So I'm going to leave these 2 buds and call that the 2-bud spur. We might get a shoot growing from this bottom portion, but I'm not going to count that in this case. On this spur position, I'm going to choose the upper to separate it with a little bit of distance from its neighbor here. Here's 1, 2 buds, cut it in a slant away from the bud. Here's a situation where I might even consider choosing this to keep the spacing, again, better here. That's a close call. I'm not really sure which is better, but I'm going to go with that, even though I'm making the spur position a little bit higher. Now, sometimes you might choose to just use a 1-bud spur if you're seeing a really weak shoot. So if both of the shoots here look like this, I would probably prune it to 1 bud to focus the growth into this one remaining shoot. Again, remove the top completely. And then create a 2-bud spur. 1 bud, 2 buds. Here we only have 1. It grew fine. 2-bud spur, cut on a slant away. So there you get it. One of the important considerations during pruning are certain fungal pathogens. There's pathogens called Eutypa lata, which is also known as dead arm, and bot canker, which is infected from the Botryosphera species. Both of these enter in pruning wounds, can infect often from the edge of the vine and move through the vine and actually kill an entire arm or even the whole vine eventually. There's ways to manage Eutypa once it's infected by pruning it out of the vine altogether. We'll talk about that in another video down the line. But ways to prevent the infection from happening altogether, there's a few different strategies. One is to prune very late. The Eutypa and Botryosphera spores are dispersed in the early winter rains more than in the late winter or early spring rains. There's just more inoculum around earlier in the year. So pruning late helps to reduce the incidence of Eutypa and bot canker. Another objective that you can do if you don't have time to prune everything towards the end of the season is pre-prune. And pre-pruning helps you to basically eliminate some of the labor needs, and you could do it with very unskilled labor. Basically, you just come through like this and cut about a 4 to 5 bud spur. And even if they get infected, the fungus moves pretty slowly. So by the time you come back in late winter, early spring, like in March, to do the final pruning, A, it's a lot easier because you've ripped everything off, and B, then you can come in with a smaller skilled crew, and you're going to prune out any Eutypa that might have infected this area when you prune to your 2-bud spur. I'm going to choose this way, I think, over here. That's 1, 2. There we go. So now I'm gonna do some close-ups. Here, a one-person production team here. Here's an example of a pre-pruned vine. I just did this before, so you can get that idea. Here's an example of a completely pruned vine. And now we're gonna do some close-ups and look at what the buds look like. So I would not use this as a bud. This would be my first bud, and that would be my second bud. Cutting it on a slant away from the buds. I would do something like this. It should just drip off here. And there you have it. Although, actually, sorry, we would probably do this. So again, one more. Cutting the top one off, and two budding the bottom one. So that's my introduction to pruning. Happy winter, and we'll talk about cane pruning in the next video.